video, I will be cooking chicken with dumplings from The Taste of Country Cooking by Edna Lewis, published in 1976. Being a Southerner myself, born in Memphis, Tennessee, Edna Lewis is one of my favorite authors, and this recipe really hit home as the style of homemade chicken with dumplings I had as a kid in the 1980s, and it's really not too much effort to put this together, including making the dumplings from scratch. I don't recommend this as your first Edna Lewis book, despite it being the first one she wrote, only because I think In Pursuit of Flavor is a little more accessible if you're unfamiliar with American country cooking. But if you have some familiarity or you just like this style of a cuisine, I recommend picking up this book as well, as aside from the classic recipes, it has several recipes I had never had before that came out amazing, such as blueberry cake with blueberry sauce and Tyler pie. And there's actually more that I would like to try, and I probably will do future videos out of this book. So in my opinion, it's a buy if you are looking to add something to your library. With all that being said, let's hop into the kitchen. Here is the setup for our Southern style chicken and dumplings. We're going to do this in two phases here. One is the chicken sort of soup or stew, and then we'll do the dumplings separate, so there'll be a separate section for the setup for making the dumplings later. But to get us started here, to make the stock, we're going to need chicken, obviously. I have white meat chicken tenderloins there, and then this is a key ingredient for this particular dish in that you need whole chicken wings, which means you need this part too, because this is going to do some long cooking in the Dutch oven, and this part has some gelatinous stuff in it that's going to help thicken the stew. You're not actually going to eat that, but it needs to cook in the stew before you eat it. We've also got onion. We've got a couple of stalks of celery. You're going to need a whole stick of butter and peppercorns. And as with most recipes, there'll also be salt and pepper. I don't usually mention that, but I just, for this video, thought I would mention that. I don't ever actually. I just assume that you have salt and pepper in your kitchen. The first thing we're going to do is melt this stick of butter because we're going to fry this chicken in this butter to get it started. So that's going to take a minute because it is a whole stick. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that and let that go. And we'll be back at the point where we're putting in the chicken. All right, you can see our butter is melted and it's turning brown just slightly. So we want to go ahead and get this chicken in there. That chicken is going to release a bunch of juices in there, so it's probably going to get watery here in just a minute. But, okay, we're going to let that do its thing. And while that's doing its thing, we are going to... The recipe says to grate the onion, so I've already peeled it in, and I'm just going to go ahead and grate this in. Later on, sneak preview, I guess. Later on, this recipe says to... drain or strain the solids out. So a lot of this stuff, I think we're going to put the whole peppercorns in. We're going to put a bunch of stuff in here that's going to slow cook together to get all the flavor out of it. But it's all going to come out before you actually eat it. All right, I'm going to finish doing this and we'll be back. Okay, we're about ready here. This is one of those recipes actually where the recipe specifically says to not allow the chicken to stick or brown, so we're not doing that. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and cover this. I didn't include chicken stock in the recipe earlier, but it doesn't matter. It's going to be, you can either just cover this with, add water. You can see how thick this is, this onion and butter and chicken mixture is. But you just want to cover it with enough liquid to get it up. Now I just happen to have not a partially used chicken stock from the other day, so I'm going to go ahead and just finish up using it. But you can use water. The chicken will flavor. The chicken and the aromatics we're going to put in will flavor it even without that. And I probably will also add some supplementary water to this as well. In fact, I definitely will, because that's not, as you can see, that wasn't quite enough to cover and still wasn't enough to cover. So let me get this filled up here and I'll be back. Okay, as you can see, we have it here so that our chicken is completely covered in water and stock. It's looking really good. It smells really good so far already. So the next thing we're gonna do is add some of our broth flavorings, our stew flavorings in here. You don't have to chop these up because these are gonna get filtered out later, so it's actually probably making it easier on yourself to not chop these up. I just chopped them once so that they would fit into the pot a little easier, but go ahead and put your celery sticks in. And we're gonna put 6 peppercorns in, and again, those will go away eventually as well. All right. And I haven't put any salt in yet because that's going to go in at the very end. So if you know, and don't taste it until the chicken's cooked, right? You don't want to taste, you know, raw chicken juices. But if you were to taste it, it wouldn't taste super great right now because it doesn't have any salt in it yet. And the dumplings aren't in there or anything like that. So, okay, we're going to go ahead and cover this up. And this is going to simmer, keep it on a low simmer, so just barely bubbling for about 2 hours. And then we'll be ready to add our dumplings in because those cook quickly and have our chicken and dumplings. Just wanted to give y'all a quick peek here of how this is progressing. This is about 30 minutes in, and this is the slow bubble you want it to be at. But if yours looks like this, you're doing it right and you're doing good. So I'm gonna put the lid back on and let it continue to cook. Okay, while the chicken is cooking, we're gonna go ahead and make our dumplings. So the first thing we're gonna do is sift flour so there's no lumps in it. If you don't have one of these mills here, I would definitely get one if you're going to get into any sort of baking because I use it quite a bit. Yeah, and sometimes your flour has these solid bits in it that you don't want in there, and that's another reason why you definitely want to do this, aside from just making your batter or your dough smoother. So, okay, we're gonna add baking powder. And then we're gonna add, this is brown sugar. We're gonna go ahead and put that in there. I use light brown sugar for this as opposed to dark. And we need just a little bit of salt. Just a little bit, not much at all. Like that's plenty. Okay, let's mix all that up together. Okay, we've got all those dry ingredients mixed together. So next we've got some cubed butter here. And in this case, I'm going to use my hands to sort of mix this in because that's what the recipe says to do. And I probably could use a cutter or some other tool, but I like to follow directions with whatever book I'm cooking out of, just to make sure that, you know, this is not the first time I'm making chicken and dumplings, but for all of y'all, the first time I do something, I try to mirror what the author had going on as much as possible to make sure that I'm getting an authentic result. And this also extends to ingredients, sourcing ingredients. I try as much as I can. I can't always. Sometimes I have to use substitutes, but as much as I possibly can, I try to use the authentic ingredients and get my hands on them because I want to taste what those people taste in their kitchens rather than, you know, my approximation of what they make. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, we're going to go ahead and add our milk. And now we are not going to use our hand. Now we're going to use the spoon and turn this into a nice dough here. I've mentioned this in other videos too, is you definitely got to give flour time to sort of distribute, and it doesn't instantly It's not just like, you know, Kool-Aid powder, right? It doesn't instantly absorb water and become what your final product is. It takes a few minutes for it to work through. So just because what you're making here doesn't immediately come out exactly the way you want it to be, it does not mean that you've done something wrong. You need to give it some time to process and sort of come out. So like right now, if you were looking at this, you would say, even myself, who's done this many times, like that looks kind of dry. It doesn't look right. But it is. It just needs some time to distribute that liquid and for that butter to liquefy a little bit, and it'll all come together into a smooth dough here. You can see it starting to do that already. So, okay. And it's also kind of okay for this dough to be a little bit dry because it's going to be cooked in soup. So it's going to puff up when it goes in and absorb a ton of liquid. And that's what you want. You don't want, if you put wet dough into soup, I've never done that before, but I mean, that almost like strikes me as a noodle, not a dumpling. All right. Okay. So yeah, this is the dough that we're going to use here. Just so you can see, I did have to work it with my hands a little bit to get it to sort of congeal into this, but it is soft and pliable like Play-Doh. So it is workable, and it is going to work for what we're doing here. So, okay, I need to get out the rolling mat so we can physically shape our dumplings here, and then I will be back. I have our rolling surface prepared here. I have our dough, which has come together nicely. Went ahead and floured both the rolling pin and the board, and we're gonna go ahead and roll these out. Now, at least in the southern US and in the areas around, like, you know, southern Illinois and places where I grew up, Tennessee, places like that, the dumplings are thin. They're not, generally speaking, I know in Germany, dumplings are round, right? And sometimes even here, I would imagine this recipe actually has its origins probably somewhere in Central Europe, if not Germany itself. But for southern U.S. style chickens and dumpling, you want these dumplings to be pretty thin, and you can pretty liberally roll this out to make them. We want these to be pretty thin because, again, they're going to absorb liquid and puff up to some extent in the soup. So that's why I'm really kind of just working it to try to get as many flat dumplings as I possibly can. So we're almost there. Let's check that thickness. Yeah, that's about what we want. Maybe a little too thick there. Okay, we're gonna call that good for today, because like with most of my videos, my family is actually going to be eating this. This is going to be our Sunday lunch after church. Yes, I got up early today. All right, so we're just going to cut these into strips. And you don't go hard with your knife here, because you don't want to cut your rolling mat. You just want enough to essentially pierce through the dough. Some people do them in the recipe actually calls for doing them in diamond shapes. The shape doesn't really matter, but the chicken and dumplings I've always had has had just sort of a rectangular shape to them. So that's what I'm going to do today. And let's see, can we... No, we're not going to do that. We probably could do it, but we're not going to. We're going to do this just the normal way here. Okay, and for our soup today, these are, I didn't cut it all the way through. So for our soup today, these are approximately what our dumplings are going to look like before they go in. And like I said, these are going to puff up before or when they go into the soup. They'll still be flat and they'll still be rectangular, but they'll get more volume once they actually go into the broth. All right, I'm going to finish cutting these dumplings and I will see you guys at the next step. Okay, we've got our sauce strained here, and now is the point in time when we're going to go ahead. I'm letting this pot of broth sort of heat back up again before I put the dumplings in, but we can go ahead and season with salt and pepper now. Guarantee that's not enough salt. That's actually pretty close. That's why you always taste to make sure that it does need a little bit more. Okay. Oh man, that tastes great. Okay. So we're going to go ahead at this point. We're ready to go ahead and add our dumplings in. So I'm just going to do that. And the dumplings, obviously the dumplings still have flour from where we rolled them, right? So that flour is also going to mix in with everything else, and it will also thicken the soup. So that it's if you've ever had it before, you recognize it. You can see they're already starting to float to the top there. They'll absorb some of the liquid, they'll release the flour into the liquid, and they'll just make some real good dumplings here. I'm glad that these started popping up right as I put them in so that you can see kind of what happens here. And so these are all going to go in. And then I'm going to chop up the chicken, and then we'll add the chicken to the pot as well after it's all chopped up and deboned, and then we'll have lunch. So, all right, I'm going to let you guys go while I finish this up, and we'll see you at the next step. All right, our dumplings are looking really good, and we are ready to go ahead and fold the chicken back into it. So I've gone ahead and chopped and shredded that chicken a little bit. In there. And you can see that, like, even though I'm like shuffling things around, the dumplings are not breaking up. They are quite solid here. And yeah, we're just gonna, everything's all done essentially. You could eat it now if you wanted to. But I'm gonna let this is one of those dishes that I think is better the longer you let it simmer for. So I'm going to let this simmer, and then I'll see you guys at the finale. And here is our completed chicken and dumplings. It's looking really good. The dumplings are nice and fluffy and thick. The chicken is well cooked, and the broth is well seasoned. So I'm going to dig in. If you enjoy my videos, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one.